You know, you might know that you can use a serger for some quilt piecing. It makes a pretty mighty fine 1/4 inch seam. But did you also know the serger does a pretty fun specialty stitch called the Flatlock, which is great for quilt piecing because it gives you a decorative seam and you can get some pretty fun wacky stars and really nice strip. You can do so much. I'm Cathy. This is Sewing Tech Talk. The Baby Lock Triumph and I, we're going to do some fun, innovative, and improvisational quilt piecing. Stay tuned. So really, just about any of the Baby Lock sergers, it's really easy to set it up for a Flatlock stitch. Now that Flatlock stitch is really most commonly used in garments because it literally is a flat seam. Super great for activewear because it doesn't abrade the skin because it's so flat. But it really makes a fun decorative seam, and I thought that would be great for quilting. So in a previous video I used that and I put some strips together and I cut it on the bias to create a really fun binding. And I thought, I need to use that for more quilt piecing. So let's talk about that today. So there's 2 different Flatlock stitches. There's the wider one and the narrower one. And they really only use 2 threads. Like I said, just about any of the Baby Lock sergers is going to be great and easy to set up for a Flatlock. I'm using the Triumph today because the Triumph has a few special extra, well, bells and whistles that's going to make this process pretty cool. Remember, you can do this on a Flatlock serger that creates a Flatlock stitch. But let me show you my special considerations for the Triumph. First and foremost, there's a new sheriff in town. This is the Baby Lock foot that comes with the Triumph. This is the new Ultra T serger foot, and it's made of a special material. And this material is like a Teflon-like, that's the Ultra T, but it really reduces friction. So I can use it for any kind of serging. I can use it on, like, if I'm serging vinyl or leather or anything like that. But I'm using it in this application because it really reduces friction. Talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. Some other things that you might need is, well, we're going to do a Flatlock stitch. Sometimes I care if it's a 1/4 inch, sometimes I don't. So I have a couple little samples, little squares of fabric. These are 2.5 inches wide, so I can do a test to see if I can get that 1/4 inch. There's a handout that helps you with that a little bit too, but we're going to talk about that in the video. And of course I'm going to need thread for my serger. So for the first stitch that I'm going to do the wide Flatlock stitch, which I think is really fun and decorative. For that I'm going to use a Decora thread in the needle, and that's going to give us that ladder effect that you'll see in a little bit. There is Pearl Crown rayon, and that's just a little bit thicker. The Decora is a 12 weight. I think that this might be a little bit too thick for what I'm doing, so I love the Decora 12. Glamour is also a really fun thread, and it's a metallic, and it's a 12. You'll need a Kona serger thread for the lower looper. Any color is going to be fine because it's not going to show. And then when I go ahead and I do that narrow Flatlock, I like to use an embroidery thread in the needle because it's going to show out just a little bit more. So that's kind of what we got. Oh, and when I press my seam open, I use Best Press because it kind of holds that Flatlock seam open. I think I need a new bottle of Best Press too because I've used this one up a little bit. So now, let's explore that Flatlock stitch. Here's kind of a sample of what it looks like. So a Flatlock stitch, if you can see, on one side, it has this, look like a regular serger stitch. On this side, it has the little ladders. You sew it with the pieces together, and then you pop those pieces open. I'm going to use this ladder side as a decorative effect on all the little quilt piecing that I'm going to do. Now, I have the Decora in the needle of the serger. It's a 12 weight. So I've used a serger needle that's a size 90 to accommodate this 12 weight thread. When I use the embroidery thread, I can go down to a size 75 needle. And it's pretty easy to thread the machine up for the Flatlock stitch. It really only just uses 2 threads, which is pretty fun. The lower looper threads just like it normally does when you're threading the machine. But when I bring this thread down in the upper looper path, I just take it and I come all the way over here and I thread it through the needle. If I'm doing a wide flat lock, well, I just use the needle in the 01 or the left position. Now, because I'm only using 2 threads, I don't have a thread in that upper looper. So what I'm going to do is I engage what's called the subsidiary looper. And what that does is that rocks up and clicks into place. It kind of pushes that looper thread over. It kind of acts as a pusher. So when I'm using the 2 threads, I have to have that engaged. Now the settings, pretty easy. They're in your quick reference guide that comes with any of your baby lock sergers. So I'm going to do the 2 thread flat lock wide. I have the instructions in your handout as well. It's pretty simple to set up. I am going to put on the Ultra T foot. And the other thing I'm going to use on the the Triumph, it also works on the Ovation, is this is the traditional overlock cover that comes with your machine. There's a new one, and I kind of like it, and it's called the Overlock Table. So I'm going to change over into that. I like it because I don't technically need it for this stitch, but what it does is it gives me a place to put my hand on the right, and I kind of like that. Oh, let's put the foot on. We kind of need that. I have the presser foot lever. And I also have a knee lever with the Triumph as well. Kind of really helps me keep all hands on deck. Now what I really like, if you look at the quilt behind me, this is pretty much all pieced on the serger. It's my kind of funky flag quilt. So for these stripes, I hope you can see what I have is I have that ladder stitch, adding an extra decorative effect to all these different colored stripes. So I'm going to do some strip piecing with that. And here's some of my stripes now that I'm working on. You can see that yellow Decora thread is giving me this fun ladder effect as it comes through here. And I'm going to add my strip. I have a whole bucket of fabric here, and I'm going to line everything up. I got to close my door so the machine will stitch. The Triumph has a couple of safety devices. It's not going to sew without the presser foot down or the cover closed. That's kind of nice. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew my strips together using this flat lock. Now I love sewing strip sets together on a serger. Why? Well, because if you've ever sewn strip sets on a regular sewing machine, sometimes if you sew a lot of strips together, what happens is the strip kind of starts to curve just a little bit. And that's because the sewing machine is great, but it really has that one set of small feed dogs. And resistance on the top, I'd use the Ultra T foot on the sewing machine, but the resistance on the top kind of pulls the fabric. Anyway, on a serger there's more control. There's more control because the serger has 2 sets of feed dogs, and I'm using this Ultra T foot to reduce the tension, the pressure, the resistance on the top. So I find I get a really nice strip set. On a sewing machine, I really only sew small strips together for that very reason that it curves. But as you can see, I sew a very long strip set on the serger, and it comes out super flat. So let me sew this flat lock seam, and it goes really fast on the serger too. So I'm going to bring it up here, and I have my blade up, but I'm really only using it right now to clip a little bit on that right hand side, because I have these strips are cut straight a grain, and you can see they're mightily fraying. So let's sew this flat lock, and I'll show you what that looks like. Now I can sew a flat lock seam at speed, I really can, but I'm kind of having matching thing. I kind of want to sew a little bit more slow. On the Triumph I have the speed control. So what that does is when I reduce this, if I accidentally press the power pedal down just a little bit too far, it's still going to stay at a nice moderate speed. So I sewed just a little bit just to give you a visual, and here's what the seam looks like. On the one side I have that basic serger thread any color serger thread. And on the other side, I have that Decora thread. And you can see this is what it looks like before you've opened the seam. When I open the seam, what happens is I take the two fabrics and I give them a pull, and that's where the magic happens. I get that really fun decorative element on my seam, which I think really looks cool. Now what I do is after I do the Flatlock and I open it up, I give it a spray with the Best Press and I iron it flat. I find the Best Press helps it hold its position because I want it to stay opened up just as much as I need. Now, I did an experiment because I find strip sets are great, but what if I want to sew a block together and have the seams match? You know, when you piece a quilt block together, you need to use, well, a 1/4" seam. And that's super important when you're doing like triangles or anything like that. So let me show you this block. I kind of experimented with this block and I did some triangles in the corner. Now I cut these triangles using any quilt pattern. I wanted to make this flying goose unit in the corner. And so I cut the triangles and I wanted to put everything together so that it came out like it's supposed to come out. And I need a 1/4" seam for that to happen. Well, how do you tell if you've got a 1/4" seam or not? That's where my little squares come in. So this is a 2.5 inch wide square, and I know I need to sew on this seam. And I'll show you what happened. I found that when I sewed the two pieces together, what happens is this was almost exactly a 1/4 inch on this side and that side, and yet it didn't come out like a 1/4 inch seam would. Why? Because they overlap each other. So I found I needed to take off just a little bit when I trimmed, when I serged. So I came in and I decided I need about 1/8 inch. Now that's hard to judge, right? But I found a trick. I looked at the blade and it's about 1/8 inch wide. So here's what I did. I brought the fabric in and I put it so that it's on the right side of the blade, which just happens to be right here at this little silver part of the machine. You ready? So my pieces overlapped. When I pulled them open, they should come to about, they were 2.5, right? So I'm going to use my handy dandy ruler to see if they are where they're supposed to be. And oh my goodness, they're supposed to be 4.5, and guess what? They're 4.5. So my little trick is just cut off, when you're doing the wide Flatlock, just that corner, not that corner, that side about 1/8 inch, which is the width of the blade. And it comes out pretty good. Now when I'm doing piecing like this, what I'm going to do is I'm not going to cut this square till I find out I've done a pretty good job with the distance there. So I recommend that if you're going to do fancy piecing, and I like the look of it, but if you're going to do fancy piecing, then kind of cut the squares. I cut this and this as I went, because this is a little bit different than the usual size. So that's your 1/4 inch, right? Now, what if you just don't want to worry about that? What if you want to do some fun improvisational piecing? And I think this technique is awesome for that. In improvisational piecing, you're kind of putting things together that, well, if they match, it's great. If they don't, that's great too. So let me show you this fun quilt that I've started, and then we're going to go to the narrow Flatlock, and I'm going to show you that you can do some really fun piecing. So check this out. So here is some 10-inch squares. I have these squares, and I've had them forever, and I didn't know what to do with them. So what I decided to do was do some fun, kind of funky, a funky 9-patch. So what I did is I took my strips and I cut them in 3 parts, but they're not equal, they're not measured. I just did random cuts on there. And you can see, well, they're pretty random. Now I'm going to sew these together, but I want to mix up the colors, right? So I'm going to take the top one here. I think I cut 5 pieces. There's the top one done. Now we'll take the top two of this one, shuffle it to the bottom. It's kind of like shuffling a little deck, right? And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew all these together with my wide Flatlock. I don't have to worry about 1/4 inch piecing here. I don't have to worry about the width of the blade or anything like that, because what it is what it is. So when I finish this part, let me show you something fun. Then what I do is I have this, right? Then I take these, press them open, get them wide, then I cut them this way, and then I sew them together using the Flatlock. And look at that fun, funky 9-patch that I'm getting. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew all these together, and I'll show you that in a little bit. I'm going to lay out the quilt. I have some really cool embroidery designs that I'll have to show you when I get there. So that is just some improvisational piecing. And this quilt, it's almost put together. It's only 2 hours of kind of easy, fun little serging. Now what I need to do is I need to cut apart something a little bit more fun. I want to do a crazy star, and that's a little bit more of interesting improvisational piecing. So I'm going to meet you at the cutting table. I'm going to show you how I cut that, and then we're going to come back, and then we're going to do that narrow Flatlock, which solves a lot of problems when you're doing some crazy stars. You know, cutting table cat adds that extra layer of difficulty whenever you're making a quilt. Move along, little thoughty. Okay, so there's all these 10-inch collections of 10-inch squares, right? They're coordinated, ready to go for a quilt. I had this collection, and as I showed you, when you cut them apart, you sew them together. Now that these have been sewed together, I'll take ones with different cuts, not all the same cut, and I'll layer them up, and then I'll cut them this way, right? And then when you sew those together, you get this really fun, kind of wacky 9-patch, right? Now, what I'm going to do with this collection is I'm going to do that, and I have saved these other squares from the collection, and I'm going to do some embroidery on those, and I think this will have a fun look. The embroideries I'm using are going to be the Botanical Garden by OESD. Now, here's a secret tip from where I got these. If you attend Moore's a tech party, either virtually or in person, there's usually a free gift. This was one of the free gifts. So look at these fun designs, how fun these are. These are mostly like 1 or 2 color designs, and I'm going to do them like red work for this quilt. So I think that's going to be really cool. So there that is. Now, you can also do some more improvisational piecing that's a little bit more, let's just say, a little bit more out there. So I have instructions in the handout for doing these fun stars. And I've already cut this apart, but I want to show you, basically, you know how you made a star when you were a kid? You did like this, right? All just straight cuts. So basically, I did that. Now when I cut them, what I did is I did leave a point. You can leave that distance a little bit farther apart. And I did 3 very unmatching fabrics, right? I wanted to see, my theory is when I sew them together, they're kind of going to look like they match. So I cut them apart. I'll spread it so that you can see, right? Now let's make that star. I'm going to shuffle this fabric to the back on all the different parts, and then I'm going to go to the serger, and we're going to sew these together with that Flatlock stitch. And I think it's going to look pretty good, even though, well, here's my theory, even though these fabrics really don't match, I think it's going to look good. So there's my star. I used 3 fabrics. I cut them all apart. Now when you cut them apart, you want to keep them real close together so that they're going to more likely match. And if you're going to do a series of stars, all of the stars you cut, you need to keep that same shuffle. Do you know what I'm saying? So if I cut another set, a stack of, if I put together another stack and I cut it, those are all going to be sewn together with each other. But by shuffling it, you're going to get different looks. Now this, I don't know, that's a pretty wacky fabric in the middle. So let's go to the serger, and we're going to use that narrow flat lock to put this together, because if you did this on the sewing machine, well, I'll tell you over there, it comes out a little bit better, I think, on the serger. So that's a pretty wacky looking star, right? So now here's my prototype, what I put together. Now these squares are a little bit smaller. I do recommend squares this small. These were like 6 inches, I think. I kind of like the 8 inches and bigger because it makes them kind of smaller and awkward and more challenging. I'm sure you could do it, but so when you put these together, what happens when you're doing this improvisational piecing with these more radical angles? If you put them together on a sewing machine and you use that 1/4 inch seam, what's going to happen is it takes away a 1/2 inch in between the two, and the angles, well, you don't get really good edges, and you have to trim all that away. What I need to do is, if I'm doing this improvisational piecing, is I need a strong seam that's not a 1/4 inch. Fortunately, I have that. When I do the 2-thread narrow flat lock, it's a strong seam, but it's smaller. So I don't have that much radical distortion when it comes to the edge. So all I did on the machine is I moved the needle over to O2, which is the right hand position. I moved my stitch selector down to B, and I turned the width. This is recommended in the, everything's the same as it is in the quick reference guide, to the width of 3.5. So I did all of those, and I'm just set up. I put a regular, this is a black embroidery thread in that needle, and that's going to be my ladder. Let's see what that looks like. I am using the blade, but I'm just using it kind of like a seam guide. If it trims away some of those threads on the edge, that's fine. If it trims away a little bit of the fabric, that's okay too. So here we go. So here is my narrow flat lock. Oops, I hope you can see that it is quite a bit narrower than the other. When I open it up, what happens is it is much smaller. It's taken less of a bite out of that seam, and it doesn't come to a 1/4 inch for sure. Now let me sew together a wacky star. So here's a wacky star. And what you're going to do when you're putting this together is you're going to put together the parts kind of like you cut it apart. So I'm going to attach this to this, this to this, and I'm going to have just the straight seams. So let's do this first one. And I want to show you the other trick that came when the other trick I discovered when I'm putting this together. So normally, when you're putting these two together on a sewing machine, what you would do is you would overlap this just like that, so that you would get that point in there, right? I discovered that you throw this rule absolutely out the window when you're using this narrow flat lock. What I'm going to do is I'm going to match the points exactly to the points, just like that and that. Now, if I'm sewing this on the sewing machine, that's wrong and bad. No bueno. But when I'm doing my narrow flat lock, what's going to happen is it's going to take such a small bite, it's going to come out a little bit better than if I had overlapped them like that. Now, the other thing I discovered is when I have a point like this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have that on the top. It really doesn't matter what side you sew on to get this flat lock. And I have my knee lever to help me lift up that presser foot, keep all hands on deck, and get that point right next to the needle and right next to that blade. So that blade, remember, is acting as a seam guide. So let's stitch this. Look at that sweet narrow seam, and then let's see what it looks like. Oh, what fun! So not only am I going to have a whacking star, it's going to kind of look like I hand stitched it. Now this is going to go to that next part, and that next part is this right here. So I'm just going to sew all my parts and pieces together to get my star. Let me show you this next part. I'm going to open up the seam before I go to the next one. I'm going to line this up. I really recommend you only do one star at a time when you're sewing this together because it's kind of easy to get the pieces confused. So I lined up this point, and this doesn't necessarily match down there, and I have that thread, but the blade is going to trim that off for me. Knee lever, get it right where I need it to be, and stitch away. So there's my fun, wacky star point. Notice, I even have the point coming out here, so I'll have that 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now when I get everything put together, it might not be a really pretty square. So I'm going to find, after I do them all, the measurement where I can square them all up. And I'm going to square them up to that. Or maybe I'll just serge them together with a flatlock. Maybe a wide flatlock, narrow flatlock. You know how you can decide now. I hope you enjoyed coming in to see me sew some wacky quilt seams with a flatlock. I think it gives you a fun, different, well, it's kind of fun way to piece. It goes pretty fast. You never run out of bobbin with a serger. And if you need a quick, fancy, kind of fun quilt, I think the serger and the flatlock might be your answer. I'm going to shoot it off to George. He's going to tell you a little bit more about the Triumph. Thanks for watching, and explore with your serger. It can do some stuff that you can't believe.
Thanks, Kathy. That was an amazing presentation. The most advanced feature on this is Revolutionaire. Now, Babylock invented the air threading serger, but Revolutionaire is different. It has 2 separate motors that thread both the loopers with a burst of air, as well as all the needles with air. And so it's so easy. No longer do you have to struggle with that serger that is so difficult to use. Now, this serger is actually up to 8 threads. You can use it in 8 thread combinations, and that gives you 87 different stitch combinations. Now, why would I need to use that? Well, first of all, this serger is a 4-thread overlock, and the overlock on this here, you can sew on all different fabrics because of a patented auto thread delivery. Auto thread delivery, they call it ATD. It actually has a device in the machine that forms the stitch with the perfect amount of thread. Now, what that means is that there is no tension adjustments whatsoever. Now, there are brands out there that have so-called computerized automatic tensions. Well, there are too many combinations to give you every single setting. So, for example, with this machine, all I do is select A, B, C, or D based on the type of sewing. So A would be my 4-thread overlock, like on this knit, which is just so easy, and it has such good fabric control. But it also could be a wide stitch, like, let's say I wanted to do a 2-thread with this thick thread. There's no difference whether you have a thick thread or thin thread or different weights of fabric. I can change it to B, and that is for my 3-thread. And the 3-thread on all fabrics, from cottons to stretchy fabrics to metallics. Speaking of metallics, I can work with metallic threads so easily. And so I don't even have to worry about it tangling because the machine brings it through perfectly. And as you see here on this metallic stretchy fabric, it's beautiful. In fact, it has such good fabric control that it actually can do serger crochet, as you see here with this metallic braid. No problems. Now, let's say I want to do a rolled edge. This is what's so cool. I can actually just turn a lever to rolled edge, and it forms the stitch perfectly. And regardless of the fabric or the thread, it gives me that beautiful rolled edge. All I have to do is select letter D, and everything is perfect for me. Because it doesn't work with tension whatsoever, I can actually select the wave and get this beautiful wave stitch. That is so amazing that I can use for decorations. Now, so far, I've just described a 4-thread serger. But this is not only a 4-thread serger, but it's also a 4-thread cover hem machine. And so what is a cover hem machine? Now, first of all, this serger has a very large opening and beautiful, beautiful lighting. I can easily convert it to a cover hem and put this table on. And now a cover hem is that commercial grade stitch that both hems and finishes all at the same time. I can do a triple cover hem, which is really good on very, very stretchy fabric. But then just by simply removing the needle, I can do a narrow cover hem, which is better on some of your real slinky fabrics like this metallic. I can also use it for woven fabrics. Now with woven fabric, I want to use the wider stitch. So that is the cover hem. Now what's really exciting about this serger is that I can actually merge all this together. It has everything. So it has up to 8 threads. And what other sergers don't have is your 6, 7, and 8 thread combination. So for example, let's say I want to sew very, very heavy fabric, okay? Well, first of all, the cutter on this is a locking cutter, okay? That means it has no flexibility on it. And what that means is that on this very, very thick fabric, it can cut it very thick. But I want to use all 8 threads. That is the widest 4 thread and the widest triple cover hem all together. And that's going to give me amazing strength. I also can use the 8 thread with the cover hem for working with ruffling. Now this has a single unit differential feed. And what that means is that it moves in a much more consistent, longer path, a stroke. And so gathering, okay, this is what's crazy. This serger can gather like you would not believe. The differential feed, I can adjust it to the maximum on this, and I can actually take, and this is where I would use I love the knee lift. The knee lift gives me hands-free capability. And so I can actually put my ruffler foot on here, and I can lift up my foot without having any need to hold onto the fabric. And then I can put my fabric on the bottom that I want to gather, and then put a piece into the slot that I don't want to gather. And in one pass, I get this beautiful ruffle that can be used for a dust ruffle or pillow. It is truly, truly amazing. Now, I mentioned that this serger can work with decorative threads. Now, there's a lot of different weights of threads. It even has a special bypass where I can put a thread up to a 4-weight thread in it. That no other serger has this capability, and this almost looks like a yarn. It is so amazing. That is why this serger is the most advanced and the easiest to use. So throw away that old closet serger. Get the new Babylock Triumph. This will completely expand your creativity and cut your sewing time by half, making it much more efficient. So I think you agree, this is quite the amazing serger. It's more than a serger. It is an 8-thread creation machine. And it gives you so much capability to go beyond the next level in your sewing, quilting, and embellishment. Now, we have a very special buy on this machine. This has a regular retail value of $7,499. Right now, for a limited time, we have it on sale for $4,999. We're offering interest-free payments, as well as we're offering free shipping across the country. But wait, of course, there's more. We're going to include this 165-page full-color inspirational guide. This will give you step-by-step information to do everything, all 87 different stitch functions, and it's beautiful in detail. Now, this will also coincide with the 60-day membership to Love of Knowledge. This is a vault of different videos done by Babylock educators that will take you step by step through the basics, as well as advanced techniques, as well as using accessories. But that's not all. I have picked out some of my favorite accessories to add in addition with this. So first of all, we're going to include that ruffler. I love the way that ruffler works, and this way you can do the ruffles, dust ruffles, and you can do your pillows, and it's amazing. I'm also including a piping foot, and this will give you the ability to make the beautiful piping on edges of pillows and other accents. The elastic foot not only works with elastic, as you see here, but you can actually take a fine wire and do a rolled edge over it and make your own ribbon. I'm also including the beading foot, so you can take beads and pearls and do some amazing embellishments, as well as the belt loop foot. Now, how many belt loops do you want to make? Well, this is amazing what you can do with this. You can actually fold fabric and weave this together to make amazing fabric and different shapes, all with the cover hem. Now, there's an amazing new product that is an extension table that allows you to use some of the cover hem accessories while serging. And so this table, I'm including this brand new table that wasn't available for the Triumph before, as well as the special guide that will allow you to adjust to have such fine measurements to give you a wonderful seam guide. In addition, I'm adding this binder that can be used for quilting while serging or as a cover hem, and you can do some beautiful decorative functions with your 8 thread. All this and a few extras are included in this special bonus. Click on the link to order, email us at customerservice@moors-sew.com, or call us at 1-800-865-9664.